so guys, we're going to move on to the sources of the Constitution. I know you've done the quiz, I know you've done the notes and prechewed, but I thought a little bit of input from me would be good. So here's a little video just for you guys. Don't worry about that, that's just old stuff. Okay, so the UK Constitution, people say we don't have a constitution, but that's not true. We do have a constitution. Okay, the only difference is it's not written down in a single document. Okay, but it does come from somewhere. All right, and these are all the again. Here you go. These are all the sources. You can take a moment, have a look at that. Which ones are actual sources and which ones are false? And here are the answers. Those are the ones that are sources of our constitution. Okay, so we have statute law, common law, conventions, authoritative works, treaties. Okay, I know you've done this already, so I'm just going to go quite quickly through all of these. I'm going to spend a bit of time on ones that from the quiz I think you haven't understood so well. Okay, look at that, sources of the Constitution. Do you get it? Very good. Okay, so statute law, this is any law that is passed by Parliament. Okay, it's an act of Parliament. It will always be called the something something act, or the something act, or the something 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 act, and it will have a date on it, the date it was passed. Okay, that's how you know it's a statute law. It's a law, it's written down, it's enforceable in the courts. Okay, more rules. Thank you. So each government passes new laws, okay, and common laws and conventions can be turned into statutes as well. But until it's gone through Parliament, become a law in the normal way, it's not a statute law. Okay, fairly simple this one, I think. Okay, next one, and this is where people have a bit of problems. Okay, so I've gone for a bit of salad cream here. Great source, a great source, often overlooked by people. Okay, so common law. This is basically decisions that are built up by judges. Okay, and I'll give you a really interesting example. This is what I always start with my kids. There is no statute in Parliament that says that murder's illegal. Why? Because murder has been illegal for so long that murder has always been treated in the courts as a indictable offence, or previously it's punishable by death. It's not anymore, but it's always been illegal based on the common understanding of judges. Okay, so there is legislation in the UK that relates to homicide, but it's usually in relation to prison terms and things like that. Okay, but what this shows us is that by making decisions, judges actually make law. Okay. Now I'll read from the slide and let's see what I've written is any good. This is because it comes from case law. All right, common law is made by judges, and so it's named because it's common to every person in every region of the UK. Okay, decisions are made in court are binding on future decisions unless they are overturned by a higher court. It is important in cases where it is not clear how statutes should be interpreted. Most of the original laws concerning civil rights began in this way, such as freedom of speech and freedom of movement. Okay, so what this means is that when Parliament makes a law, they will often not cover every single scenario in that law. All right, so it's down to judges, who are professional legal people, to make a decision. Now, once a decision has been made by a judge, all other judges must adhere to that decision. And that's why in court you hear lawyers saying, well, in reference to Fraser versus the Crown, 1967, this is the precedent. So it's called a precedent. Okay, so when a judge makes a decision, all other judges have to adhere to that decision. Now, if a defendant thinks it's unfair, they can appeal and go to a higher court. Okay, so if they start in a magistrate's court, they can appeal to the Crown Court, and if they don't like the decision of the Crown Court, they can appeal to the appeals court. or to the High Court, or maybe even to the Supreme Court. Okay, because when we later in this chapter you'll see there's a sort of hierarchy of courts. Okay, a decision can only be overturned by a higher court, and if it is, that becomes the common law. Okay, so basically judges have a certain amount of power to make law. Okay, but they're only interpreting law, they're not making new laws, they're interpreting existing laws, but when they make a decision, all other judges in future have to follow that decision. Okay, and because law is common to all parts of the UK, as soon as a judge has made a decision, that decision then becomes binding on all other courts in the UK. I hope that makes sense. Common law is normally the one that students have the most issues with. Okay, in prechewed it did give you some examples as well, so please try to use those. Forget about that. Okay, conventions. Conventions is a regularly observed practice that considers appropriate for a given set of circumstances. Okay, so constitutional conventions are therefore sets of rules established over time by custom and practice, which relate to the exercise of government powers. They are not legally binding. Okay, so this is really important about conventions, is that something that we usually do, and if you don't do it, everyone might stand back and go, you shouldn't do that, you're breaking the convention. But you're not breaking the law. Okay, you're just breaking normal practice. All right, so examples can include the Salisbury Convention. So the Lords should not block legislation from a manifesto. So if a government has come into power and force a campaign on a manifesto promise, for example, the Conservatives in 2015 said they were going to reform the welfare system, and then they came in and then they cut certain things like disability living allowance. Okay, and the Lords blocked it, and the Conservatives got very angry because they said no, that was a manifesto pledge. So what that means is that people have voted for it, and that is a strong mandate, and therefore the Lords don't have democratic legitimacy because they're not elected, and the Lords should not stand in the way of us completing this manifesto pledge. And we'll look at that example a bit more later. But that's the Salisbury Convention. And Gordon Brown also suggested reform of never declaring war without prior parliamentary debate. Okay, there were lots of other conventions as well, like if you want a big constitutional change, like leaving the EU, you should always have a referendum and stuff like that. But the thing to remember with conventions is they are not law, they are just regular practice. Okay. Next, you've got works of authority. This one's quite simple. These are just people who have learned people, lawyers and constitutional experts who have written books or articles, and they decide what's a good thing to do or a proper thing to do. Although they are written down, they are not enforceable. They are not laws. They are just considered works of authority. Okay, so the most famous one is, I don't even know how you say his name, Baghots, I don't know, the English Constitution, so that was like 18 something. The most recent one, O'Donnell, he's a recent politician. In 2010, he wrote the O'Donnell Rules about how to form a coalition, and he wrote that, he was a Conservative minister, and he wrote that while they were trying to form a coalition. So if in a future election we have to form a coalition, people will probably refer back to the O'Donnell rule book. Again, it's not laws, but it's what they did last time. So quite often they'll try and do the same thing. Okay, so the I'll go back there. Magna Carta, Bill of Rights, Settlement, and then the treaties are like EU. So treaties, an example could be EU law. Okay, so the reason we're in the EU is because we've signed the EU treaties. Okay, and then we also signed statute law, like the European Communities Act in 1973, and that took us, and that basically said in UK law we will accept these treaties. Okay, so the laws and treaties of the EU have become a significant source of the British Constitution. As you know, these are very important and they're very powerful. When EU law and UK law conflict, the EU law takes precedence, okay, which means EU law is higher. So it feels like EU law is like a higher law, like an entrenched law from a constitution, but it's not, because Parliament has parliamentary sovereignty. And so at any point, Parliament can repeal the EU, the Acts of Parliament that took us into the EU, with fresh Acts of Parliament or Acts of Parliament annulling that law, and then using parliamentary sovereignty as they plan to do still insane, and as they plan to do still in December this year, to take us out of the European Union. Okay, so examples of this include the Treaty of Rome 1956, the Maastricht Treaty 1992, and the Lisbon Treaty. Okay, what have we got? Don't about that. You can't do that. You can't do that. Oh, forget about it. Okay, so okay, that's the end of my presentation, I think. I'm going to try and put this into a video. I hope this. That's an old exam question, so don't do that. You'll notice it's only 10 marks. I hope that made the sources of the Constitution a bit clearer for those of you who may have been struggling. And I'll catch up with you all soon.